thank you all for coming here and listening to our stories. To begin with, I'm at an age that you can't read without glasses anymore, so you allow me. We are here to talk about gender-based religious persecution, often abduction, forced conversion, sexual violence, and forced marriage of minor girls, but also of adult women, of very often, let's be honest, non-Muslim communities. Because this is happening predominantly in Islamic regions or countries. Unfortunately, although lately there is a recognition of this important issue, even though there is a continuous appeal, as you've heard from my colleagues, the press is still underreporting all these cases. We hardly see any of the heartbreaking stories that we've heard today from the Yazidi communities, from the Assyrian communities, from the Christian communities in Pakistan, and obviously the organization I'm representing here, the Copts in Egypt. We hardly hear what is happening to these women and girls. When Coptic Solidarity first, in July 2024, contacted me and asked me if I wanted to help them join them in writing a report on what was happening with regard to the situation in Egypt. You only have to hear and listen to what our dear speaker, our witness, Christine, has been telling us to understand that I did not have hesitate to say yes, of course. If there's anything I can do to speak for those who do not have a voice or use the knowledge I have, of course I will. What are the things that I found? Just summarizing the report that I wrote for Coptic Solidarity. If you haven't been able to get a copy, please find someone who will give you one. Starting with the title, I titled the report Hidden Crimes, Public Deception, because unfortunately that is what we are seeing, not only in Egypt, but you've heard also these stories from the other representatives. The Egyptian government is very successful in the West, put on another face, so to speak, and pretend that they are very much concerned about women's rights, about women empowerment, about religious freedom of minority groups within the country. But the situation on the ground in Egypt itself is the opposite, I can tell you. The interviews that my dear colleague Gara and I did together with the victims and the relatives, the families of the victims, of women and girls that were abducted, raped, trafficked, forcibly converted to Islam, tell a complete different picture. We hear that there is state denial, local authorities deny what is happening, but the stories of the families, as I said, are different. The state denial of these sexual violations, these abductions, these forced conversions, is not just something the Coptic community is telling us. This is well documented by other organizations such as Human Rights Watch, Euromed, and others. Not only with regard to the Copts in Egypt, but also to, for example, women from refugee groups from Syria, Lebanon, and the Sudan in the 1990s, who also stated that they were harassed, sexually violated in Egypt, and the government denies it. And I also hear that Human Rights Watch, for example, stated, and I quote, that the Egyptian government has no interest in protecting these women or even investigate these crimes and bring rapists to justice. It is important to realize that this is not just a case of a story the Copts tell. It's important to get this broader perspective that I'm sharing with you from these other reports, because in my opinion, as an academic, that actually tells you that what the Copts are telling us and have been telling us for decades is nothing that we should doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that what these victims and their families are saying to us is, in fact, true, and it is happening. Why do I focus so much on that? Well, because, the past 2 days, I've been invited to speak with several representatives and senators and congressmen. And this is one of the things that I often hear. Is it true? How do we know it's true? Do you have proof? When a country, when a justice system denies parents, denies victims to even report the missing of their children, their daughters, their nieces, how can they be put to the test to prove what is happening to them? You're asking something of a group, a marginalized, discriminated group, that they simply cannot provide because they don't have the chance, they are not given the chance to give you that sort of evidence because they are not allowed to report these cases. When they do, and some courageous families actually do, go to a police station, we have heard, my dear colleague and I, stories of women who were undressed at the police station, who were pressured to state that they had been sexually active with men, while that was not the case. But they said that they were because they were pressured and intimidated to such an extent that they wanted to just stop the interrogation. That is the reality on the ground. And we are asking these Copts, where is your proof? I said this at the UN 78 on this subject 2 years ago almost. We in the West tend to think that the world works as our Western countries. You are raped, you go to a police station, a nice officer gets you a cup of coffee and asks you your story. That is not what is happening in these countries. The rest of the world doesn't work as we do in some of our countries. And one of the things I want to highlight is that these religious communities, as we've heard today, from the Yazidis, from the Assyrians, from Pakistan, but also Copts, this is a case of compound crimes. So we are talking about trafficking, we're talking about rape, we're talking about sexual violence, we're talking about all sorts of crimes that are just all piled up. And that makes it very difficult, as I found when I was writing the report, to get like data collection. And another, I think, blind spot is the fact that it is religiously motivated. So the forced conversion often goes together, as you've heard from my colleagues, with the sexual violence and the forced marriage. And before I close, one of the most important things I think is that when we think about how to stop this, we need to understand the breeding ground that allows for these things to happen. And the breeding ground is the discrimination, the marginalization, which puts people, in a state of second-class citizenships, which does not give them the proper rights other people in those countries have. And then specifically with regard to Egypt, Egypt is a country where not just Copts, but many other incidents of sexual violence. It is the highest percentage of sexual violence in the Arab region. It is 63%. That is breeding ground. When women's rights are not respected, it will make the situation for the most vulnerable in such countries even worse. And that breeding ground, I've focused on that because I think that is one of the things that is really important for us all to understand, because when those human rights, women's rights or human rights violations, when they are happening, the most vulnerable people will always be targeted first and have very little justice done. I thank you very much.